Live from London, this is BBC News. Former President Donald Trump arrives in New York ahead of his appearance in court facing criminal charges. This is the scene live in Manhattan, where the media has gathered for one of the biggest stories of the year. Several people are seriously injured in a passenger train crash in the Netherlands. Australia bans TikTok on all government-owned devices because of safety concerns. And Finland will officially become a member of NATO later on Tuesday. Hello there, I'm Victoria Valentine and a very warm welcome to the programme. Donald Trump is spending the night in New York at Trump Tower before appearing in court later. He's set to make history once again, this time as the first president of the United States to be charged with a criminal offence. The charges relate to money paid to a porn star to keep quiet about an affair before the 2016 election. This here is the scene live in New York. It's just gone midnight and the judge has ruled that pooled media will be allowed to take still pictures in the courtroom just before the hearing gets underway, but TV crews, TV cameras, will only be allowed in the outside corridors. Now, security measures will be in place, of course, with the authorities expecting demonstrations by the president's supporters and also opponents. Let's get the very latest from Michelle Fleury in Manhattan. And we've had a little bit of an update from the Dutch emergency services over that train crash outside between The Hague and Amsterdam. We now understand that at least several dozen people are injured and are being treated after a passenger train derailed. This when it collided with a freight train. The front carriage ploughed into a field and a fire has broken out. So we know that at least 50 people were on board that passenger train, and we understand now from the emergency services that several dozen people are injured. We will keep across that story for you, and the moment we have more, we will tell you. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News.
I have interviewed fascinating people right across the planet, whether that's heads of state or global leaders from the US Secretary of State to the Dalai Lama. But the most famous person I interviewed was the film star Angelina Jolie, soon after her divorce from Brad Pitt. And we did the interview in Cambodia, where she was doing a documentary film about the Cambodian genocide. I think the most important thing when interviewing people is to make it clear that there are no questions that are off limits, that you can be free to ask anything. So whether that's dealing with an authoritarian leader or a film star, there are never any pre-arranged questions or pre-agreed upon questions. I'm always free to ask whatever I want. That's really how I conduct my interviews and how I deal with the people I'm interviewing. I like to often build a connection as well, and I think you get much more out of the people you're interviewing when you can empathize.
You're live with BBC News. Nigel Lawson, who was perhaps best known as the UK's Chancellor of the Exchequer during the 80s, has died. He was 91 years of age. The current Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, led the tributes, tweeting that one of the first things I did as Chancellor was hang a picture of Nigel Lawson above my desk. He was a transformational Chancellor and an inspiration to me and many others. Helen Catt has taken a look back at his life. And before the business, we just want to take you back to Trump Tower in the centre of Manhattan in New York City. There, Donald Trump, the former president, is hunkering down ahead of his Tuesday court appearance after a journey from Florida that drew blanket coverage from news channels, from the US news channels. He faces unspecified charges in connection with a payment his lawyer made to a porn star.
Now on BBC News, the latest business news from across the globe. World Business Report.
Hello, this is BBC News with the latest business headlines for viewers in the UK and around the world. The energy battle is heating up. The EU and the US meet to hammer out a joint policy to bolster energy supplies this coming winter. French President Emmanuel Macron and the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen fly to Beijing to meet Chinese President Xi Jinping. And feeling stressed? This month is Stress Awareness Month, so we delve into a subject that we all could have a little bit less of. Hello there. The US and EU officials are meeting today to discuss energy cooperation. The focus? Well, according to the United States, joint efforts to blunt Russia's attempts to weaponize energy and bolstering energy supplies for the coming winter. This comes as EU member states consider extending restrictions or even outright banning Russian natural gas imports. The bloc already has imposed a $60 a barrel cap on purchases of crude oil from Russia, something that the US has supported. Well, joining me now is Olga Hakova, who is Deputy Director for European Energy Security at the Atlantic Council's Global Energy Centre. Also, on the committee that looked into this sort of the trade relationship, do you think Russia has been able to weather the international sanctions thus far placed upon it? Okay, let's get some of the day's other business stories. Amsterdam's Schiphol Airport plans to cut late-night flights as part of attempts to reduce noise pollution. Plans for the airport to be rolled out in the coming 2 years include closing it almost completely between midnight and 5 a.m. A federal jury in San Francisco on Monday ordered Tesla to pay around $3.2 million to a black employee or former employee after the vehicle maker was found to have failed to prevent severe racial harassment at its flagship assembly plant in California. And Leonardo DiCaprio has made his appearance in a US court on Monday to testify in the trial of Pras Michel. He is a former member of the Fugees, a hip-hop group. Mr. Michel is facing criminal charges for allegedly helping to funnel money from Malaysian businessmen to influence US politics. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News.
People are travelling again, heading back out on the road and rediscovering their wanderlust.
Exploring new destinations and cultures, making fresh friends and creating memories that will last a lifetime.
That's why at the Travel Show, we're expanding our horizons too. And wherever we go,
we want you to come with us. Now that might make for an awful lot of excess baggage, but we think you're worth it.
The Travel Show on BBC News.
You're live with BBC News. Martha Lane Fox is one of the UK's most successful tech entrepreneurs. She was also she's a former board member of Twitter during the whole saga of the sale with Elon Musk. She sat down with our tech reporter Shona McCullum, who began by asking her about the fast developing use of AI in the tech world. Jeremy, thank you so much. That's really handy, really useful actually. So thank you very much for your time, Jeremy Campbell, leadership coach and expert on behavioural science. Before I go, let's check in with the market, see what's going on. Asian markets have been a little mixed today. Concerns about the impact of surging oil prices on inflation data offsetting what looks like a slowing US economy. The central bank in Australia deciding to keep rates unchanged at 3.6%. That's it from me. Plenty more coming up in just a moment. Live from London, this is BBC News. Former President Donald Trump arrives in New York ahead of his appearance in court facing criminal charges. And this here is the scene live in Manhattan where the media has gathered for one of the biggest stories of the year. At least 30 people are seriously injured and one person has died in a passenger train crash in the Netherlands. Australia bans TikTok on all government-owned devices because of safety concerns. And Finland will officially become a member of NATO later on Tuesday. Hello and welcome. Donald Trump is spending the night in New York at Trump Tower before appearing in court later. He's set to make history once again, this time as the first president of the United States to be charged with a criminal offence. The charges relate to money paid to a porn star to keep quiet about an affair just before the 2016 election. This here is the scene live in New York. It's just gone 1 a.m. and the judge has ruled that pooled media will be allowed to take still pictures in the courtroom just before the hearing gets underway. But TV crews, they will only be allowed in outside corridors. Now, security measures, as you might expect, are going to be in place. Authorities are expecting demonstrations by supporters and opponents of the former president. Let's get the latest from Nada Tawfiq, who is in Manhattan. Phil Mercer in Sydney. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News.
So some of the most interesting stories that I've told the audience is, well, I can look back to the very beginning of my career, junior reporter during 9/11. That was a huge story and it was so difficult to tell, particularly because I had to interview people who had lost colleagues and loved ones in those towers in New York. Moving on, the economic crisis of 2008, that was a huge story both in the UK and globally. And I talked to so many people whose lives have been turned upside down by the then banking crisis and the subsequent economic fallout. I was the chief presenter during the COVID pandemic and I was coming into work trying to convey the story to viewers who were stuck at home during lockdown, not only in the UK but across the world. More recently, I was sent to Windsor to cover the funeral of Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh. And I was there getting a real sense of loss and sadness. You know, it was a great honour for me to be sent there by the BBC to cover a story like that.
You're live with BBC News. A lack of rain in recent years has meant that the northeast of Spain is seeing its worst drought on record. This has led to a series of strict measures being taken to ensure that the area's water supply is not exhausted. It's also added to concerns about the impact of climate change in southern Europe. Guy Hedgecoe reports from Catalonia. And let's take you to the Netherlands, to the scene of that passenger train crash. Devastating news that at least one person has died and 30 people have been injured, some of them seriously, after a train carrying at least 50 passengers derailed in southern Netherlands. The accident took place in the village of Voorshorten. It's about 55 kilometres, that's 34 miles or so outside of the capital, Amsterdam. That happened at about 3:30 a.m. local time. Two of the double-deckers trains of the four carriages were derailed. There was a fire in the rear carriage that has now been extinguished. A spokesman for Holland's Midlands security region say there were many victims, 19 of them currently in the hospital. Do stay with us here on BBC News.
Now on BBC News, the latest business news from across the globe. World Business Report.
Hello, this is BBC News. I'm Victoria Valentine. Our top business stories. The energy battle is heating up. The EU and the US meet to hammer out a joint policy to bolster energy supplies this coming winter and to lock Russian oil and gas out of the market. The French president and the European Commission president fly to Beijing to meet the Chinese President Xi Jinping. And feeling stressed, this month is Stress Awareness Month, so we delve a little deeper into the subject we could have a lot less of. Hi there, I just want to bring you some breaking business news. This just in the last minute or so. Richard Branson's Virgin Orbit Holdings business has filed for bankruptcy. And a US regulatory filing on Monday, it said there is substantial doubt about its cash flow position and that it would be able to continue operating for the next 12 months. This, you will probably know, Virgin Orbit is different from the space tourism firm Virgin Galactic. Virgin Orbit spun off in 2017 or so. It went public in 2021 in a blank check deal, and a statement from the company here saying, "We have not generated positive cash flows from our operations or generated sufficient revenues to provide sufficient cash flows to enable us to finance our operations and may not be able to raise sufficient capital to do so." So they're expecting losses of about $33 million or so in revenue and a net loss of $191 million. You might remember a few days ago the company lay off almost the entirety of its workforce. The launch company saying it expects to disclose the forthcoming filing about its liquidity position. So that has come into us now. So confirmation now that Virgin's deal, their plan to launch rockets into space is no longer. So that dream for Richard Branson has come to an end. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News.
Now showing on BBC Real.
Rio Rico is a small Mexican town. There aren't many people here now, and it's hard to imagine that this place was actually once part of the US.
Borders often change, and sometimes, as in the case of the US-Mexico border, a small, now long-forgotten company can rewrite the entire history of a nation's border.
The Rio Grande has formed the border between the United States of America and Mexico since 1848. In the early 1900s, the American Rio Grande Land and Irrigation Company had a pumping station on the US side. In 1906, it cut a new channel that isolated 419 acres south of the river. The old loop of river dried up, and this area became known as the Horcon Tract, with Rio Rico in the middle.
Watch more stories like this at bbc.com/real.
BBC News. Martha Lane Fox is one of the UK's most successful tech entrepreneurs. She was also a former board member of Twitter during the saga of its sale to Elon Musk. She sat down with our tech reporter Shona McCullum, who began by asking her about the fast developing use of AI in the tech world. Jeremy Campbell there. And before I go, I want to bring you a little bit of an update on the Dutch rail crash. We now know that one person has died after that passenger train derailed. This is the scene live from the crash. At least one person killed, about 30 people injured, we understand, some seriously, after that derailment in southwestern Netherlands. Emergency services say that the overnight crash happened after the train transporting around 50 people or so hit construction equipment near the village of Voorshorten. Now, there had been earlier reports that there had been a collision with the freight train. We understand that that is not true. It hit construction equipment. Rescuers and medics are working on the scene. They remain there helping the injured. The crash happened in the middle of the night or very early in the morning, about 3:25 in the morning local time. There are overturned carriages. There was a plume of smoke. We know that the rear coach burst into flames. That fire was subsequently extinguished. There were ambulances ready to transport the injured, but we do understand that a number of people, in fact 11 people, were being treated at the houses of local residents, and about 19 people have gone to hospitals. Officials from the Dutch Safety Board, the body that conducts independent investigations into accidents, has been dispatched to this scene. This means that there are no trains currently running between The Hague and Leiden because of that crash. Do stay with us here on BBC News.